Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this leadership-focused episode, something different, something new. My guest is Taylor Cavanaugh, who takes a big, complicated life and shares insights from his time with the U.S. Navy SEALs and the French Foreign Legion, the first American in history to be part of both, emphasizing leadership and resilience. He discusses his public exposure on White Underbelly, one of my favorite interview shows, and discusses the philosophy of having no plan B while stressing adaptability to maximize outcomes, professional and personal. Taylor advises embracing new experiences, leading with integrity, and making tough decisions in this fascinating, fast-paced interview. Taylor, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you for having me, and I want to thank everybody for listening in.
Where am I finding you this morning? You're on the West Coast, yeah?
West Coast, beautiful Southern California. I'm in Temecula area specifically.
Very nice. Now, I think that's where you were kind of born and raised. Have I got that right?
That's exactly correct. Not born in Boston area, but raised here from all the formative years, kindergarten all the way through high school.
All right. Well, listen, once again, thanks for joining me on the pod. Listen, this is going to be an interesting interview I hope for both of us. And you've got just a big personal history and a big life story to tell. And you did that on one of my favorite channels, White Underbelly, for 2 straight hours, which was pretty compelling. So in our little format today, if you could give the listeners a sense of your background for a few minutes and how you spend your time today and why I was so excited to have you on the pod.
Yeah, I'll hit the cliff note. 30,000 foot overview is after high school, had a little bit of tumultuous time, but made it through, had to go to jail. Then I became a Navy SEAL, spent 7 years at SEAL Team 7, deployed to Yemen and Iraq, was a sniper, JTAC, communication specialist, and advent laden specialist in the SEAL teams. Was kicked out for just not acting right? Drinking too much, partying, fights, those type of things, and was kicked out of the military. Took a general discharge, worked in the civilian world, in the private sector, residential real estate development, and then we launched a company for cannabis distribution in California. For the first year it was legal. Doing well, but not living right, drugs, poor habits, all these things, and one cannot bend reality that long living that way, stacking karmic debt like I was, and everything came crashing down. Found myself suicidal in my truck, homeless, with no money, after having, what I thought was measures of success, and decided, I had that higher consciousness that I call it God, but that moment of clarity that said, hey, you're thinking only about yourself. Your depression is a luxury. You have family that cares about you, friends, and you need to reset this right now. And I heard that voice and I heard that calling. That call out was a call up. And I decided that if I was going to go out, I was going to do it proud. So I decided to go to France and join the French Foreign Legion. And I became the only ever United States Navy SEAL to be a French Foreign Legionnaire. And I recently just finished in December. Came back to the United States after 4.5 years there.
You know what I wanted to, we'll get into a little bit more about the military just for the listeners so they can understand a bit of context. But the French Foreign Legion move that you made, you were thinking about that kind of early on. That just didn't pop into your consciousness at that moment. That was kind of in the background somewhere. How did that even come up in the background when you were younger?
Yeah, that was my look red, grab red escape hatch. I found out about the French Foreign Legion when I was probably a child, just having interest in the military world and special force units or unique units, but not really prevalent or super present in my mind. But when I started to have some friction getting in the United States military, that's when the French Foreign Legion came back on my radar as a possibility. And then obviously when I was down and out after having been kicked out of the SEAL teams and then losing my private sector career or path at that time, that's when it came back on my radar.
I want to follow one thread there because, in my experience talking to people and just watching people, I'm a kind of a curious people watcher. Redemption comes in three ways typically for people. There's people find a God, whatever God, it kind of seems to lift them up. Sometimes they find the right person in their life, and sometimes they find it within themselves to get out of the situation that they're in. You seem to be a combination of one and three, or even actually one, two, and three. But you tell me, like, what was it, that led you to the place you are at today from a redemption perspective and the path you're on today? Was it a blend, or was it one thing, or how do you reflect on that?
Man, I didn't find God because I had always had a very direct understanding of a higher power guiding me from a very young age. I never questioned that, even during really difficult times. I wasn't raised super religious. That was just always I always felt a very close connection and a guiding force. And I always understood it to be what it was. Now, so that was always just there. Now, was I heeding the call of my higher consciousness, that authentic voice of God that was guiding me the entire time? No. And that's why
perhaps not. Perhaps not. Yeah, perhaps not. Right.
Yeah, that's why I would continue to get burned and smashed into smithereens again and again till I learned. But I found my redemption when I was in the French Foreign Legion barracks room, having achieved that goal a couple years in, and I looked around and I realized that I still wasn't happy. That I realized there was no external validation, or there was no other organization in the world to go to with the reputation. Right. I had done it, all the big ones that was possible. Yeah. And so the next part I was looking at was Ukraine, to go fight in Ukraine in the foreign fighting units there. And I realized while I was doing that I was reaching, that I was running from myself. And I looked around these walls and I went, I have to look internal. The problem's me. That's the moment that everything opened up, and I decided from that moment to start waking up early. I just started simple. I said, when do I feel good? When I'm getting up early, doing the right things. Started there. Started watching my nutrition, my macros. Started reading and reflecting. Started reflecting on the day before about things I regretted and choosing not to do that same act again. Simple. Started reading old Stoic philosophers. Started reading, Musashi, samurai philosophers. Ancient wisdom that is all the same, streaming down from higher consciousness, that needs to just be repackaged and understood for today. That's what I needed to do, and that's what I started to do. And the world opened up when I started to do that and apply it, more importantly.
Now, with this, your current path, what do you do? How do you spend your time every day? You've got it looks like when you look at your website, of course, you've got you're doing some personal training, you're doing some speaking. Is that what fills up your day today?
My whole day is packed with creating content, putting out value, working with my clients, signing new clients, speaking engagements, writing a book. So my day is pretty full. And it's all, I find my purpose in being able to share my pain with others to help others. That's where I get a lot of value, and just what I feel is my calling, to having gone through all those things and achieved certain measures of things. So it allows me a platform to speak from.
Now, for the listeners who may not be steeped in the military, I mean, there's probably nobody listening to this podcast wouldn't have heard of Navy SEALs. Now, what I found interesting in your journey is that you had applied for other sections of the forces, but for whether it's your past or whether it seemed like your tattoos, none of them really wanted you. But the Navy SEALs did. So talk about the Navy SEALs a little bit. How do they fit into the world of the U.S. military and the global military? As I just know what I know from TV, basically, but it's my first chance to talk to an actual SEAL. So tell me a little bit about that, so we just have context for your background and the leadership lessons you've learned.
The Navy SEALs, it's the special operations, special force unit arm of the United States Navy. So in the Army, you have the Green Berets. In the Marines, you have MARSOC. And in SEALs, or in the Navy, you have SEALs. It's an acronym, which means sea, air, and land. So specializing in parachuting, obviously the ocean, and combat diving, and land warfare tactics. In terms of numbers, there's only about 2,500 SEALs now. To give you a kind of a wraparound, there's 175,000 Marines right now, to give you just some numbers. And also, there's only ever been about 12 to 13,000 SEALs since 1962 Vietnam, ever.
Wow.
It's a very small group. The selection is very, very difficult. They say one of the most difficult selection pipelines, military pipelines in the world. It consists of a lot of hypothermic training, a lot of running, a lot of just a lot of volume of beatdown. And it's a direct action unit. That's what specializes. Hostage rescue, direct action. That's the specialty.
So when we think about the physical attributes, but what are the mental attributes that make you a successful SEAL? It feels like there's a blend of initiative, but also leadership. Would that sound about right?
It's an interesting group of guys because it's all shapes and sizes. Everybody's obviously very tough. You have to be. You have to have it's a group of guys that want to be anything but average. That's the best way I could say it. The culture is very relaxed in terms of formal military. We don't salute. We don't wear covers, none of that stuff. It's very relaxed just in terms of the culture, but very professional. The most challenging training I've ever done. Everybody's well-versed in public speaking. You're actually coached in it consistently. The mission planning is done from the lowest guy. So the youngest junior guy plans large parts of the mission. It's not top-down. It's a bottom-up organization. So leadership is pushed to the very bottom level. And that's the culture that I was raised in, and I've benefited from it. Now, the type of guy that makes it in is intelligent, has an ability to manage stress very well. That's probably what I would say. And also for your viewers, the most successful executives, the most successful people have the ability to manage stress. And how do you do that? You have to bring on more stress and more stuff on you. So you practice and you practice clarity. You continue to do it until you're the most competent at it, right? And then you do the next thing that's hard, that induces more stress.
What I'm intrigued about is the idea that the lowest, most junior operator actually leads the mission. I mean, that's very contemporary in terms of the modern business structure, because they're in where they're the hands-on operators. I think there's a lot of parallels between that and business. Is that what your business clients tell you, and does that resonate with them as well?
When I talk to business executives, CEOs about this type of stuff, empower your people. You're only going to benefit. A great leader creates leaders, not followers. Don't be scared to empower your people. Hey, trust and verify for sure.
Yeah.
But trust. That's the first piece.
Yeah. And trust with some pretty important stuff. Now let's talk really quickly about the French Foreign Legion, because again, we know this from movies only, but are they part of the French government? Are they separate operators? Like what kind of theaters? And I know in your story you had to give up your passport. You kind of get a different name, and talk a little bit about why they even exist. This French Foreign Legion.
Michael, that's a great question, and nobody should know. It's very odd. It's a very odd organization. It's not common knowledge by any stretch. It's a 200-year-old organization that was created by an old king of France, and the purpose was he wanted to get all these foreigners that were causing problems in bars and who had lingered from a previous war back onto the battlefield, back into a military unit to fight for France, to become the cannon fodder for France, pretty much, because there was no political pressure with foreigners coming back in body bags, not French people, right? These guys also needed a job and wanted to fight, and they had the carrot of French citizenship at the end. It was structured after the old Roman legions, that was a 17-year deal, but the Roman legions was the same. Guys would serve in the countries that they would conquer, these foreigners technically, and if they served their time correctly, they would get Roman citizenship. It's that same idea. And they have fought in every war since the 1800s right at the front lines, from Algeria all the way to Afghanistan.
And they would take their direction from the French government. I don't want to hang on this too much, but I'm just so curious. Like, who points points the arrow or the sword?
Yeah, and regarding the organizational structure of what arm they're under the French military, right? They are a formal branch of the French military.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes more sense. All right, let's transition now to. I mentioned it before. I came across you on Soft White Underbelly, Mark's platform that interviews the most interesting people. You certainly qualify for that. How did you wind up on that show? I know he's got millions of followers. I'm sure some of the folks listening watch the show, but I've not talked to any of his guests before. So how'd you wind up on that show, and what motivated you to go and talk to Mark and his subscribers?
You know, I've loved Mark's stuff also since I started watching him when I was in the barracks room in the Foreign Legion, and I was fascinated with his format. Just so raw, such a wide breadth of human beings. The story, I love biographical stories in general, and I shot him a DM, and he replied back to me and gave me his phone number in about 5 seconds, and I went up there a week later.
Wow, that quick. Fantastic.
Yeah.
You talked for 2 hours straight, and as many people noticed in the comments, I certainly noticed. I notice it now. You pause when you speak. You never use ums or ahs, or I envy that of you because I fill them in sometimes. Is that I guess you said you had a bit of training, speaking training in the SEALs, but is that your way of has that always been the way that you speak, that you gather your thoughts and then articulate what you're thinking? Is that common for you?
When I became more conscious, I started to realize that what I said mattered. So that also brings on the fact that when you have heart and you know what you're saying is true, it's very simple to not and ah.
All right, let's talk about philosophy and strategy. So one of the things I'm kind of intrigued on lately, and it's not a new concept from a business perspective, there's actually a couple of books about it, but I think about it more and more these days, is the idea of no plan B, that kind of burn the boats, however you might describe it. It comes up in some of your narratives a little bit. In other words, in some ways it was the route you took into the French Foreign Legion, like I'm going to get rid of all my credit cards, I'm just going to go, here's my passport. Maybe it was part of the culture of being a Navy SEAL, that there's a clear objective, and we're not going to create a plan B, C, D, and E, the thinking being that is kind of a shortcut to mediocrity. Yet, as you well know, more than anybody probably listening, circumstances change and adaptations are key to success. So how do you, what's your philosophy? How do you merge these two? And what's your advice around this thinking around, listen, this is my objective and it's the only objective. I'm not going to create sub-objectives. I got to win, in other words. The plan is to win.
This is such a good topic piece, Michael, because it's razor thin what we're talking about here. I'm not saying that there's not a place for contingencies. What I'm saying is when we're choosing the major movements need to be very decisive. Major movements that are difficult in life or business need to be done decisively, and they can't have, because what a plan B does is it allows you this slick downhill escape route. When things hit friction, it's like that water, that river, man. The path of least resistance leaves rivers crooked. You can't be, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, then I'll just do this, because let me tell you, anything worth doing is going to hit some major friction points. And when you hit it, you're going to immediately go to plan B. So major movements. Now, what I'm saying now, when you've chosen that major movement and you know that there's no deviating off this mission, right? The mission. But in the mission, there needs to be some contingencies because you need to have the ability to adapt, right? There's this subsection. That part's an art, right? Because it's up to the individual to decide. That part's an art. It's not a science. That's up to the individual, the leader, to decide what's the major movement, and then, okay, let's be reasonable. Now, what are our contingency plans within the major the major action piece.
Excellent. There we go. I just said there we go. So now I'm going to penalize myself every time I say it. Every time I say it. I'm not thoughtful. Shit, I'm not thinking. Gonna have to. You regularly import advice. I mean, it's really where you started the French Foreign Legionnaire. You turned the camera on and talked to the camera, and that's kind of the start of your journey, and certainly in social media and in coaching. And you do this on a regular basis. I watch a bunch of them, and one of the ones I love, and it's been turned into the kind of the meme is, you just got to get out and you change your circumstances. That's always resonated with me professionally. You're not going to the same places, seeing the same people, doing the same things. You gotta get out of that routine. Now, for my audience of business leaders and retailers, you've got a lot of these things. But if I had to have you had the top 3 most relevant and essential pieces of philosophy drawing on your experience in your life, what would those be?
First of all, in terms of a philosophy, a philosophical approach to my life, which really started to shift gears for me, was when I really started to take responsibility for my vibration. That was the first piece, was being self-aware enough to recognize when I'm dipping and what that affects, how that affects my mindset. I notice myself being self-aware enough to notice that my self-talk is going down, that my optimistic lens is beginning to close. Because as business executives, you need an optimistic lens rooted in realism, right? You need that optimistic lens with your feet very firmly planted on the ground.
And it affects other people around you, right? That vibration.
1,000%.
Right.
That responsibility for your vibration is, as a leader, you can't have a bad day. You need to be unwavering. I'm not saying not human. I'm saying unwaveringly clear, unwaveringly positive in not a fake way. You need to show no weakness on that. But you can't have a bad day because you had a fight with your wife or your spouse, and you come in and bring in that energy. Because make no mistake, energy and frequency, you can't fake it. If you come in all poopy pants, you don't have to say anything, right? People feel that, and guess what?
People pick
your
that
employees,
vibe up. Yeah, they pick that vibe up. Yeah,
start to drop down, and their productivity goes down, and their creativity goes down with it.
What's your next 2? If you can,
I would say
top 3.
So really, I would say responsibility for my vibration, superior conduct, 1,000%. You have got to have superior conduct, and ownership. Ownership, it's always your fault, right? So I would say the 3 specifically there is competency, superior conduct, and ownership.
I like that last one because it kind of connects back to your first, your training, I would say, is in you don't necessarily need to have as a leader all the answers, but it's the all those 3 things nested within it. That's great advice. Now, last question for you. Last words of advice on leadership, and I'm going to frame this in a 2 starts and 1 stop to being better leaders and better human beings. So 2 things people should start doing if they're not doing it today, and 1 thing that they should stop doing it. Maybe it's just not working anymore. Maybe it's a bad habit or a habit or unconscious habit you observe in your clients and other people. What do you think? 2 starts, 1 stop.
Start waking up uncomfortably early. Really, really early. I'm not even joking. It's foundational for serious mental clarity. I'm talking 3, 4 in the morning. It changes the game on the deliberate nature of your day. You start to really grab hold of the momentum of your day when you're waking up that early. Start reading ancient Stoic philosophy. Every single leader will benefit. Every single leader will benefit from understanding that nobody can make you feel any type of way. You can only be affected by what you allow.
Then what's your stop doing? What's that common thing you observe most often that you say, listen, fix that, stop doing that, and you'll be in a better place than you were the day before?
Stop eating unhealthy. Stop being unhealthy. If you're overweight, you are not a good leader because you're showing lack of discipline. You've got to be in seriously good shape to be a good leader. That's competency of life. That's mandatory. The second stop would be stop negative self-talk. Be very, very cognizant of how you speak to yourself. Your subconscious, as Bruce Lee said, has no sense of humor. It believes everything you tell it. You've got to speak but that's backed up by superior self-conduct, like I spoke about. You've got to have superior self-contact that raises the self-worth that allows for that positive self-talk.
That's fantastic. Now, what's next for you? What's next in your journey? You mentioned a few things off the top, writing a book, and you're doing some public speaking. And as a secondary part to that question, where can listeners go and get in touch and learn more? Are you getting on this LinkedIn? Are you? What's the best way to get in touch? But first, what are you doing today? What's next? And then where can people get in touch?
My primary focus is my coaching. That's what I do. I work from everybody from CEOs, surgeons, to guys living in their car. I have different levels, different tiers of programs for who needs what. It's anybody that is feeling like they're losing their inner peace and their clarity. That's my specialty. I know how to do this because I was at the lowest, suicidal in my truck, and brought myself back up to where I have no bad days. Zero. I can't remember the last time I had a bad day, and I'm clear because I'm aligned. Aligned living is the key, and so that's what I do. I restructure people's days. I strip it down to basics. Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication, and the way to success is subtraction, not addition. That's the other piece. Now, so that takes up a lot of my day. Yes, there's some book writing and people want to make my life into a movie, but that's secondary.
You are like a Marvel comic book character a little bit, when you see.
I got people coming over from every agency, while trying to get my book and my movie and deal and all that, and I tell them all no because I'm busy doing this. My purpose is this. I am full focus. I take no days off. Now, that's the other piece of leadership is work to serve others. I'll just toss that in there. Work to serve, and you'll be the best leader ever. Now, how people can get a hold of me is my website, taylorcavanaugh.com. Can always go read a little bit more of my story, see some pictures, and get my contact form. And that always goes directly to my personal email. They can always check out my YouTube, TCAV TV, where I dive into the deeper principles, or my Instagram, TCAV Official. DM me directly, but I also film things I do during the day and workouts and just overall life philosophy or my approach. And I'm Johnny on the spot with those DMs also. Everything goes through me. I don't outsource anything and no AI.
Well, I can attest to that. I sent you a note via your contact form on the site, and I think it was 7 minutes before you pinged me back and said you were going to join me. So I can attest to your responsiveness and your hands-on. And I'll put links to all that in the show notes as well, so folks can find you. Taylor, it's been such a treat to meet you and chat with you and understand a little bit deeper about the things that you think about and working on. So I want to thank you for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Michael, I thank you very much too, and your listeners. If you are hearing that calling to be your best, guess what? You got to do it.
Wise words of advice. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.